to serve as the executive director. We are just going to take a few minutes as people are coming into the Zoom meeting room tonight. So if you don't mind just getting settled in, we'll get started in a few minutes. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Again, welcome to the May 2021 meeting of the Bucks County Women's Advocacy Coalition. I'm Ifya Dubin. I'm honored to serve as the executive director of the organization. I'll begin with a very quick note about our technology today. When you joined the event, your microphone was muted and your camera turned off automatically. While you can see and hear us, we cannot see and hear you. So sit back, relax, enjoy the evening's conversation. You can be at your most comfortable yet very attentive self. In order to improve the view of whoever is speaking, I recommend that you go to the top right of your screen where it says View. You can click on that and select Speaker View. If you have a question or a comment, you may type it into the Q&A or chat at the bottom of your screen. I'll do my best to check for questions and comments throughout the event and address them along the way. We'll also have some time for Q&A toward the end of the evening. Tonight is our annual call to action. The event is named for what we do as a coalition: take action to educate the public, legislators, state and local officials, businesses, and nonprofit organizations to collaboratively identify needed systemic change and to advocate for or against specific legislation. We do all of this to promote equity and economic security for all. Organized in 2008 and federally designated as a nonprofit organization in 2015, the Bucks County Women's Advocacy Coalition is a nonpartisan coalition of individuals and organizations that envision a socially just and respectful society invested in a common good to achieve the full potential of individuals, families, and the community. Our work is rooted in shared principles and with a growing understanding of complex intersectionality. We educate and advocate to create systemic change. We are thrilled to call more than 300 individuals and nearly 50 organizations our partners, joining us to speak with one voice about systemic public and private reforms needed for the economic security and overall well-being of individuals and families in Bucks County and beyond. For anyone who might be joining a Women's Advocacy Coalition event for the first time today, I encourage you to visit our website at bcwac.org to learn more, and I invite you to review our principles and consider becoming a partner. A few quick notes before we get started on the conversation. Today's conversation is being recorded. Please give us a few days, hopefully until next week, and you'll be able to access a link through our website. Our next newsletter, scheduled to publish on May 27th, We'll include a link to the recording. When you take a few minutes to visit our website at bcwac.org, for more information about the organization, you can read blog posts and opinion pieces that have been published statewide. You can track legislation, and you can sign up to receive emails, including that newsletter that I talked about being published on the 27th. In addition to that, you might receive emails from us about actions that need to be taken, contacting elected officials about pending legislation. We do our best to make it as easy as possible for you to act in concert with our chorus of voices. Today's educational program, like others we deliver throughout the year, is offered for free. While this organization operates with great efficiency, we do have costs. So if you watch this today and participate today and feel like the program and work is of value to you, please consider making a financial contribution. You can do so through our website or by mailing a check. Our address is found on our website. So I've noticed a few people have come on since I started, so I'll just remind everybody that if you want to try, and it may improve your viewing of tonight's discussion if you go up to the top right, click on view and choose speaker view. You can also type questions or comments into the Q&A or chat that's located at the bottom of your screen, and I'll be keeping an eye on that over the course of the conversation. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Janet Steiner from Comcast. So hopefully Janet can get her camera turned on and her microphone turned on and join us. Comcast has generously sponsored tonight's event. Most of you have seen over the years that Comcast's commitment to community runs very deep and very strong. Janet, I'm sure will share some of that, probably just scratching the surface based on time this evening. I'm excited to have Janet joining us tonight because I've personally had the opportunity to cross paths with her countless times in service to this community. Whether it was organizing volunteers to add their hands and hearts to the work of a local organization, maybe lacing up their shoes for a walk or run, or sponsoring events like this one tonight, Comcast is typically there and Janet is often the face. She is kind and generous and genuinely interested in leveraging her position for the good of our community. So please welcome Janet Steiner.
That was like the most awesome introduction ever. I am super excited. Thank you so much for giving me a few moments to speak. I'm excited to be here with everybody. As you said, I am Janet Steiner from Comcast. I'm hopefully we'll be able to see each other in person again soon. Until then, I hope everybody is staying safe and healthy. So I'm an active member of our regional women's network leadership team at Comcast. And as such, partnerships with organizations like the BCWAC are of incredible importance, not only because the BCWAC is addressing issues that are important to women, they're also addressing issues that are important to all people. I feel incredibly lucky to work for a company that not only talks the talk, but really walks the walk. This year, Comcast is celebrating the 10th anniversary of Internet Essentials, which has connected more than 10 million low-income individuals and families to the internet nationwide so far. And we've committed $1 billion over the next 10 years to help further close the digital divide in our communities. Recently, we launched 2 Comcast Lift Zones in Bucks County to help families that still don't have access to the internet in their home environment. And in October of 2020, we launched the Comcast Rise program to help support BIPOC-owned businesses that have been hardest hit by the pandemic, social unrest, and other environmental factors. If you have any questions about these programs, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm sure if you can provide my contact information, I'd be more than happy to discuss with you. On a more personal note, as a working mom of a now 18-year-old daughter, I understand firsthand the impact of access to quality childcare for families. I mean, quite frankly, without it, I would not be where I am today. It's just not possible for parents and caregivers to show up authentically at work and to perform to their best ability if they don't have adequate and reliable childcare. I will never forget the first day I dropped my infant daughter off at daycare. I got back in the car and I sobbed for about 15 minutes straight. But I knew ultimately that she was in good hands. I knew that she was safe. I knew she was being cared for by professionals, and that as she got older, she was going to have educational and social experiences that supplemented what she was exposed to at home. By the time she got into the public school system, she was unstoppable and really is still unstoppable today. Quality pre-K really makes a difference, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation tonight and really optimistic about what's on the horizon for our kids. So thanks again for this opportunity. We're thrilled to partner with the BCWAC and the great work that you guys are doing.
Thanks so much, Janet, and congratulations on a nice grown kid. So to shift to our focus for tonight, transforming childcare. I'm excited to have a wonderfully smart, talented, and tenacious group of leaders in our conversation tonight. Leading up to tonight's discussion, and even just now listening to Janet, I was reminded of my own juggling and worries about childcare. So I'll share a personal story. In 2002, I was working for a foundation in Los Angeles, California. My older daughter was 3 and attending a Montessori school in our West Los Angeles neighborhood. My younger daughter was just a few months old in a child care center that I could afford that was highly recommended to me by a trusted friend, and it was quite good. That facility was located 20 minutes east of where we lived, which translates to about an hour on a good Los Angeles traffic day. My office was in Santa Monica, so it was another hour back to West Los Angeles. I was separated and raising my daughters on my own. We followed a very tight schedule with no room for error. Up at 6 a.m., get dressed, eat, and be in the car and on our way promptly at 7 a.m. The Montessori school opened at 7, so my daughter was often one of the first to arrive, although there were several other children coming through the doors at that same time as their mothers raced off to work. I battled traffic to drop off my baby and then battled traffic back to the west side, praying I could slide through those office doors by 9 a.m. The evening journey was filled with even more stress. Fingers crossed that nothing would stop me from walking out the office promptly at 5, often yelling assurances to my coworkers that I would tackle what still needed to be addressed from home later that night. I battled traffic on the 10 freeway east to my youngest, then hopped back on the 10 freeway west, racing the clock to get to my oldest before 7 p.m. when late charges would start to add up, and I would start to feel like I was failing as a mom. There were often prayers, curses, tears, desperate calls, me swearing I was going to just jump off the overpass, depending on how that journey went. One of the greatest days of my life, both personally and I can honestly say professionally, came just over a year later when the director of the Montessori school watched me trying to drag my youngest, a toddler at that point, out of the building after dropping off her sister. "We have to go or mommy will be late," I begged, to a child who was really too young to understand and frankly didn't care at that point. That director, who did not accept children under the age of 2, looked at me and said, "Just leave her, we'll figure it out, get to work." She accepted my underage child into her program because she knew what good, reliable, affordable, and accessible childcare meant to a working mother. She worked with me when my ex-husband did not show up to pick them up. She saw my daughters and my family as whole people, a woman who needed to work to care for her family and have the peace of mind that came from knowing that her children were in a high-quality program, developing their fresh and curious young minds in a safe environment. I also needed to not feel like I was failing. That woman helped make that possible. This past year in particular, we have all learned about what is essential. Childcare is an essential component in the lives of working women and families. High-quality childcare is a privilege to which we should all have access. In the end, all of this benefits our entire community, not just one tired mother. The Bucks County Women's Advocacy Coalition does not have all of the answers, but we do know that a transformation of childcare is essential for each of us and our community to be at our best. Fortunately, we also know some of the best people and minds committed to making this possible. So I'm going to invite each of our panelists tonight to turn their cameras on and their microphones on so that they can be introduced and we can get this started. I'm going to invite each of our speakers to start off by sharing who they are and just one reason why they think it is essential to transform childcare. It's a little bit of a challenge, I know, because there's so many reasons, but we'll start off with one, just a little bite-sized share, and then jump into the whole meat of the conversation for this evening. So maybe Donna, if your camera is on and your microphone's on, maybe you could start us off. Just share who you are and why you think it's essential to transform childcare.
Yes, thank you so much, Iffy. And thanks to everybody at the Bucks County Women's Action Alliance. And you're the best group in the state for sure. So glad to be here. And I'm Donna Cooper. I'm the Executive Director of Public Citizens for Children and Youth. I've been to many of your retreats and events, and it's an honor to be part of this event tonight. And thanks for the chance to introduce myself.
What's your one reason for why you think it's essential to transform childcare?
Yes, right. I'm very, very sorry. My one reason that I think this is essential is because we know that when kids do have great early childhood, they do great in school. And I think one of the most important things we can do for economic equity and to improve the opportunities for Black and Hispanic and other children of color is to ensure that their parents can afford high quality early childhood close to their house or close to their work or wherever they need to be. So we open up a world of opportunity for their children as they grow. So that's my my pitch on why this is important.
Thanks, Donna. Melissa, how about you?
Hi, my name is Melissa Boteach. I'm the Vice President for Income Security and Childcare and Early Learning at the National Women's Law Center. It's so nice to be here and thank you for having me. In terms of my reason, I would say I oftentimes think about the workforce, the workforce that is almost entirely women and disproportionately Black, brown, and immigrant women who are doing this critical work. And oftentimes there's so much underinvestment in the system that they're receiving poverty wages. And so parents can't afford more and making too little. And it's some of the most valuable and important work in our society. And I think it speaks to a larger devaluing historically of undervaluing care work precisely because of who does it. And so when I think about gender and racial justice, valuing childcare providers, valuing the unpaid care work that mothers and other caregivers do is such a core essential part of gender equality, that this issue is like connected to almost every other issue in the gender justice movement.
Thanks, Melissa. Mai.
Good evening, I'm Mai Mixick. I am the Early Childhood Education Policy Coordinator at Public Citizens for Children and Youth, or PCCY as we call ourselves. I am very excited to be here tonight to talk about childcare as both someone who works in the field as an advocate, but also as a mother of a 5-year-old and another baby on the way. I think about it a lot. Not from the perspective of just parents, but also, I was a Head Start kid. I came to this country as an immigrant, and I have very fond memories of how transformational early childhood education can be for a kid that is new to this country and doesn't speak English. And so one of the reasons I think the time has come to transform childcare is not just for working parents, but for the next generation of kids that's being raised in this country.
Thanks so much, Mai. Valerie, how about you?
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Valerie Hamilton. I'm with Children of God Educational Services. I'm the owner operator. And my one reason is simple. It's a necessity to build up our community as a whole. So that way everybody can come together and we lift each other up. And that happens with our youngest people, our little guys, our preschoolers.
Thanks, Valerie. Nancy, if you're there, I think you're unmuted, but we don't have your camera on. So there you go. How about you?
Okay, thank you. Let's see, I've been doing this 36 years, and the changes that have occurred over all of these years haven't gotten better, which doesn't say too much for childcare. So when you asked me about, I think you were saying transforming it, I think what we need back in 2002 is when Keystone Stars came in. And they really did try to do increase the quality of the childcare, which they did. And then it has dwindled down in the past, I would say 5 years. So we don't have as much support for our staff I have people, as I was talking to, that have been there 17 years, 18 years, 10 years. I have about 25 staff taking care of about 100 children. When I look at this, what do I see over these past years? I see a larger number of children that need special needs, behavioral issues, things like that that we didn't have back in 1984 when I started this. So we need extra people because the regulations will say 1-to-10 ratio for preschool, 1-to-4, that kind of thing. That hasn't changed in all the years, but that can't be done when you have behavioral issues. So that's really my focus, is to have more support and not just somebody coming in, not that they're not helpful, they are helpful, but for 30 minutes once a week to help a child with the behavioral issue. That just doesn't cut it at all. So that's what I see. We need support for the directors like we used to have back in 2002. That was a big help, because if I'm a leader of my staff, I need to be confident in what I'm leading them. And there's just that is not happening now from Octa. So that's my big push.
Well, I'm excited to hear more. In a minute, we're going to hear more from Valerie and Nancy both about their particular experiences. I want to just mention that we have another panelist who will be joining us shortly, Lissa Shulman, who is frankly juggling some childcare right now, getting one of her children, I think one of her 3 children, settled into bed. So she should be coming on probably a little after 7, at which point we'll hear more from her anyway, and we'll get a little introduction from her. But I'd like to start tonight a little looking at this idea of childcare in practice, so that people have an idea of kind of what the landscape may look like right now. And so I'm hoping we'll start with Valerie and Nancy, both taking some time to share a little bit about their on-the-ground perspective of childcare. And so I'm hoping you can share a little bit about how your centers are organized, because I think you probably both have different approaches. So what that approach is, a little bit about the day-to-day, and what you think transformation could make possible for you. I think maybe we can start with you, Valerie, and then bounce back to Nancy afterwards.
Sure, thank you. So my program traditionally services children who are special needs. We have gifted children as well, and children who are traditional. And basically, we provide respite care for our special needs students, and it can be a challenge, like what Nancy was describing. We see an uptick in our behaviors for our children, the social and emotional health of our children, getting access to services for those children. While they may be available, it's very limited, and it might take a long time. So if you have a child right now who needs services, they might not receive it for another 3 to 6 months later. And by then they might be in, a school age program, or, the issue might have progressed to where they can no longer be in your program because they're a danger to themselves or to others. As far as what I see on a daily basis, because we were open during the entire pandemic since March 18th to service our essential workers, our essential personnel, we saw children who were stressed, who were frustrated. We had children who lost a caregiver to COVID. So that came with a whole plethora of issues, and not being able to get a live one-on-one person to service them, to counsel them through the grief. We saw primary caregivers, a grandparent who was diagnosed, and the grandchildren wondering, well, what's going to happen to us? So these are the type of things, not just COVID related, but just that we see in general, where a grandparent might be raising a grandchild for whatever reason they are, and having to figure out, well, what's going to happen to us, the child feeling, what's going to happen to us when we get older? Who's going to raise us, who's going to be with us? But then we're still asking them to remember their ABCs and their alphabet and count and do everything else. And for our school age kids, we're asking them to multiply, divide, whatever the case may be that the school is asking. But in their mind, they're just trying to make sure that they have enough food, that they're taken care of, and that they are not causing trouble in the environment that they're in. So at my facility, we're non-traditional, we're a safe zone. So our children can share any and everything with us. So our circle time is a time not just for learning for our little guys or for our school agers, it's a time for them to share. It's like a therapy session where they can share, well, what happened to you yesterday? And they will share everything. And whether it's, mom didn't come and pick up yesterday, or dad was a little frustrated about this, or dad is in jail right now, or mom this, we hear it all. And our kids, nobody laughs at another child. It's their time to share. But this leads me to the point where, and if we're transforming childcare, we definitely need to think of adding services for not only our children, counseling services I'm referencing, but for our teachers and our parents as well. Because we have parents out here who have experienced some level of trauma and they haven't addressed it. And now they're walking around trying to function within this trauma and raise children within that. And it's just kind of like a mess. And then we also have teachers, especially early childhood teachers, who are dealing with chairs flying past their faces, or children who we cannot help or service. And that's all we want to do is help and service them, and not have the resources. So counseling for the teachers to encourage them, to give them resources on how to build themselves up, because they have their own families, they have their own issues and things at home, and then they come in and love on our kids, which I'm very grateful for. I have a smaller team, smaller center, but big issues. So, and I think we're just a sample population of what everybody is going through in the childcare industry, especially when it comes to dealing with children in their social and emotional health. Everybody is seeing it. It's not just me. It's not just my center. We're all seeing the need, and counseling, access to counselors, access to those resources. It costs money. It's out there. We just need the help associated with that. Hope that helps.
Thanks, Valerie. Just, you may have mentioned, and I maybe just missed it, what ages do you have in your center?
Absolutely. So we service 3 to 12-year-olds, preschoolers, before care, after care, summer camp.
And summer camp, you said?
Yes, absolutely.
That's great. Thanks so much. Nancy, if you're there, do you want to give us a little description of what your center looks like, what your approach is, what you're kind of seeing day to day, and what transformation could make possible? I know you shared a lot at the intro, but if there's some more that you can add into, please feel free.
Valerie's 100% correct. I mean, 100% right on the money. My background is I'm a registered nurse. I have my degrees in early childhood and elementary. And as Valerie and I were talking about, I have my counseling degrees too. So I use every bit of what I have gone to school for in my center. I used to do, I was an Abington visiting nurse. And that's what I liken this to, the childcare, because that's what you're like. You're it. The parents need help. The children need help. The grandparents need help. The grandparents, we have more grandparents taking care of children than we ever had. Many of them can hardly, well, right now they're not walking through the door, but they used to. Their knees hurt, their legs hurt, they're older. They've already done, have already, taken care of their own children. I'm a grandparent, so I can identify with them. I'm a mom, I can identify with them. I do so much talking with parents that it takes me away from the children. And that's why I say we need more help in our childcare centers, because we are just not taking care of the children like we did in 1984, 1985, 1986. You may have had pockets of this, but not like we have today, and not like we have with the children with special needs. It's more behavioral. Jolly Toddlers is where I own Jolly Toddlers. It's in Southampton, Pennsylvania. We've been what's called a PBIS school for at least 10 years. And what is that? That is social emotional. That is what we deal with. Just like what Valerie was saying, asking the children how they feel when they come in, some of the parents, just like a couple of the parents were saying, they're rushing their children. They have to, because they've got to get to work. And the child feels that. So the child comes in, they're already upset. The mom doesn't mean to do that. The dad doesn't mean to do that. That's just the world as it is. So I have a fish tank there, big fish tank. Pretty much by the time they get to the fish tank, it's like a doctor's office. You know, hey, fish, it sort of calms everybody down. They will get to that fish tank and watch the fish tank, and they can calm down for a little bit. It doesn't help with everybody, but it does help. So that's why we need more help, because the children need it, and the parents need it. If I call, this is another thing. I have conferences with these parents all the time. Even in COVID, we've set out a little bit when it was sunshiny outside with just chairs. The parents are sad. They're not just because of COVID. If their child is, causing trouble, they think it's their fault. It isn't their fault. It's nobody's fault. We just have to talk about it and figure solutions. And what Valerie was saying, by the time we put in for services, it takes 4 to 6 months to get somebody in there. And that's reality. That's not fair to the child, and it's certainly not fair to the parents. So that's it. Anybody have any questions they can answer?
I'm sure there's going to be plenty of questions.
Okay.
I have to say, I'm kind of struck as I'm listening to you both talk about those needs and really kind of the needs of like the broader needs of the child and the needs of the family. Almost childcare doesn't seem like the right word anymore because there's so much more to it. And frankly, coming off of primary election day yesterday, where I'm in Central Bucks County, and the school board was a big topic that kept coming across my social media feeds and everything. And I'm struck by the fact that I see things in conversation about middle and high school students around the social emotional toll that really says like, right, you're talking about something that's really over the life of a child. And so, right, which I think probably ties back to Melissa's whole point of it touches just about everything in some way, shape, or form. So I'm sure we'll hear more about that. I'm gonna maybe ask Mai to take a little time next to talk a little bit. We know that there's a lot about equity or inequity that shows up in all of our systems, and that this isn't an exception. So I'm kind of curious, Mai, what you find when you really look at this issue and examine it through an equity lens.
Sure. And thank you, Valerie and Nancy, for your perspectives. I think what Valerie and Nancy both offer are what we in the industry, we see them as high quality providers. And they're so important because they are able to provide that care for kids at a time when their social emotional needs are so critically important. And so one thing we have to think about is whether or not all children have access to high quality childcare, because that just isn't the case. So in equity, when we talk about equity issues, it's twofold. It's one on the consumer side, with families not being able to have access to affordable, high quality childcare. And two, it's equity when it comes to the wages that the childcare providers get, and whether or not that is a social justice issue or economic issue is up for debate. But for us, we think it definitely is. And so I want to talk about first about affordability to high quality childcare. So we know across the country that the trends are that children of color are more likely to be found in, more likely to attend programs that are not high quality. In the state of Pennsylvania, 48% of white children are in high quality childcare programs, and only 29% of Black children are in high quality programs, and 36% of Hispanic children in high quality programs. So that's a pretty big difference. And then in Bucks County specifically, 60% of white children are in high quality childcare programs, compared to only 47% of Black children and 54% of Hispanic children. So when we think about what these children of color are accessing when they attend childcare programs, they're accessing the resources that Nancy and Valerie are offering in terms of social emotional support. Their parents are getting that support as well from the high quality staff. They're getting, curriculum, high quality curriculum. They're getting learning and socialization. So it's so critically important that we increase access to high quality childcare. Now, what is the barrier to actually becoming a high quality program? And that's a really
You anticipated my follow-up question.
Yeah. So why aren't children of color attending high quality? One is considered the bottom and 4 is considered a high quality program. Programs tend to have trouble moving up in those quality levels for a number of reasons, but one of the biggest reasons that they have that they struggle with is finding credentialed staff. And the reason why they can't find credentialed staff is because it's so difficult to operate a childcare program and be able to offer the salaries that are attractive to staff who are credentialed. Because at the end of the day, childcare providers are competing with school districts who can offer competitive salaries and benefits packages. And the average salary of a childcare worker in Pennsylvania is just a little bit over $10.50. And every day we hear about Target paying $15 an hour. I saw this week Chipotle, McDonald's, they're all starting to offer salaries at $15 an hour that start at $15 an hour. And you hear about Wawa giving sign-on bonuses. I mean, the market is such that staffing is such a problem right now for childcare providers. And the biggest barrier to becoming a star 3, 4 is finding staff, retaining staff, so that you can be considered high quality, but also that your staff have the skills to serve the families that really need them. And this race kind of cuts through all of this. So it's children of color who are often left out, and then it's women of color who are often not being paid the salaries that they need. So there was actually research done just this past year that Black women educators in childcare are paid 78 cents less per hour compared to their white peers. So that just goes to show that the race issue is not just in access to care, but also the salaries that the educators are making.
I feel like I have so many questions in response to that, but I'm sure we'll all kind of tie together and circle back more. So thank you. Lissa, welcome. We gave everybody a hint and a clue that you would be joining us eventually. So I'd love for you to not only to introduce yourself and let people know who you are, but then also maybe talk a little bit. I know you've worked as a teacher, you worked for a state rep, you were a policy director, right? You have many different ways that you've kind of looked at this issue. And so just share a little bit with us about what you think is really important for us to know and understand about how it's handled in Pennsylvania, and then other things that you've seen from your perspective.
Yeah, sure. Excellent. And was the bio circulated, or am I introduced, or did
I did not circulate it.
Okay.
You get to just wow everybody by bragging about yourself.
Okay, sure. So hi, I'm Lissa Geiger Shulman. I am currently doing some education consulting work, but if you touched on my background there with starting out my career as a teacher, working then in what I thought would be education policy for a state rep. I was a chief of staff to a state rep who was a freshman member of the minority party. So when I joined his office, I thought, we're going to write bills, we're going to pass legislation, we're going to get all this stuff done. I was like fresh out of the classroom, very green in state politics, really learned a lot about just how Harrisburg operates, how slow things can be, how political and difficult it can be to pass really important policy change. And then I was a policy director working really on this, access to quality childcare, a lot of the research that Mai just went over, and working directly with providers around trying to elevate their voices in Harrisburg. And then most recently, how I come to this is I was a candidate for state representative in the 30th House District, which is sort of the northern suburbs of Pittsburgh and Allegheny County. So I think, for me, really what drove me to move from working in Harrisburg as an advocate and bringing providers, childcare programs and parents to advocate on this issue was a recognition that there was just a lot of lip service really being paid to the issue. We would have great meetings with elected officials where they'd say, yes, we support your issue. Yes, we'll do whatever we want. And yet year after year when the budget was passed, it was incremental changes. It wasn't big proposals or even conversations, right, around universal childcare or increasing teacher wages. It was, we're going to give you whatever, 10, 20 million more dollars. We're going to spread that out all over the state. And everybody's, feels just like really, really tiny bits of progress. So what led me then to kind of take the dive into running for office was also recognizing just what the makeup of our legislature looks like. We're at about 27% women in the legislature, which while we know childcare affects parents of all genders equally, it certainly is often the case. I can speak personally in sort of my relationship with my husband. The childcare falls a lot to women, and that's just kind of backed up by research when they survey families about who's kind of taking that on. So thinking about how this lack of women in our legislature really leads to a lack of attention and that lip service on the issue, lack of action. So that drove me to kind of run a campaign where I really, at least pre-pandemic, of course, 2020 elections, just like everything else, was really affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. But really tried to run a campaign that was focused around the families in the suburban communities that I would have represented, but a lot like what I know to be true in good portions of Bucks County, kind of middle to upper income families who are still struggling with childcare, to say nothing of your lower income or other disadvantaged populations who it's always been a challenge to find access to quality childcare. So yeah, I think the other piece, if I'm going on too long, I can pause.
It's fine. You're fine.
Okay. The other piece I wanted to mention too, so as I became a candidate, there's an organization I linked up with who endorsed me called Vote Mama. And it's run by Luba Gretchen Shirley, who is a congresswoman in New York. She's the congresswoman who in 2020 got the FEC decision to allow campaign funds to be spent on childcare. And really one of the key driving factors towards me running when I entered the race, I was gonna have actually had a primary challenge, but I knew that I could push on making sure that in Pennsylvania, we could get childcare dollars or campaign dollars allowed to be spent on childcare, which is a huge, it's a barrier for women across the board. It's a barrier for single women. It's a barrier for a lot of folks. And so really being able to push on that, getting the party to actually back and say, we're going to allow you to do this, which I still had to fight, even though a couple candidates did it in 2018. When I first asked about it, they were like, yeah, we really want you to save your money for advertising, whatever. And to say like, no, this is a barrier and this is why we don't have enough women in our legislature. And it's why our policy on childcare, on paid family leave, on so many of the other priorities of this organization, I feel are not moving forward.
Awesome. Thanks, Lissa. Melissa, we're going to turn to you a little bit for just a little bit of that national landscape, what you think you're seeing some of the momentum for change.
Sure. So this is a moment unlike one I've seen in my professional career. It's a once in a generation opening that we have to really push for bold and transformative change in childcare and early learning, and to get out of this incrementalism of year over year, just be grateful for this marginal increase that's spread, like peanut butter across a piece of bread. And so the pandemic has left in its wake, and it's not even in its wake yet, it's still ongoing, so much trauma, so much suffering. But one of the silver linings of it is that all of a sudden, this internalized sense that I think a lot of women in particular, parents in general, but again, mothers in particular had of, why can't I figure this out? Why is this so hard? All of a sudden you looked around and you realized everybody was experiencing the same thing, that rather than this being some private failure, that there was stigma or shame around, that childcare was beginning to be reimagined as a public good. And not only that, but the false distinctions that we make between childcare and education were starting to blur. K through 12 education is clearly childcare. You ask any parent who has a school-age children who is doing distance learning, and childcare is clearly education. You ask any parent, myself included, who saw their child miss out on those socialization and on the, the gross and fine motor skills and the things that you get during those years when the neurons are flying. And so being able to make that connection between childcare and education in a different way, showing that it's a public good, has led to a lot more political pressure and a lot more openings at the federal policy landscape. So I can share a little bit more about what some of that looks like, and why this is a historic moment for us to really push through and win for childcare and early learning. So the COVID-19 pandemic, we've been documenting for a long time the ways in which it's been affecting childcare providers and parents across the country. I can share in the chat, if it's useful after this, some of the resources National Women's Law Center has put out about over 2 million women getting pushed out of the labor force, and women getting slammed in industries like restaurants, retail, hospitality. That's why Dr. C. Nicole Mason has dubbed this the she session. And so we were saying from the beginning, we need childcare relief. We gave Boeing $50 billion, one company $50 billion, and we can't get relief for childcare. And people just could not see it. They couldn't see what was going on right in front of them. And as we kept documenting it, what we were finding when talking to providers was that because a lot of places pay based on attendance and not enrollment, as parents were pulling out because of the pandemic, they weren't having the income come in. At the same time, they were expected to stay open to serve frontline workers at an increased cost, because with social distancing, they had to deal with ratios that were different. They had to deal with PPE. They had to deal with like substitute teachers, et cetera. So we worked with an economist to quantify the cost of what it would take to keep childcare providers afloat. And we came to $9.6 billion a month. Well, we got 3.5 billion, and then nothing for another 8 months. And so during that time, we saw mass closures. It's like, I mean, I hate to say I told you so, but I told you so. And so now, when the Biden administration came in, a lot of the lawmakers were primed and ready to say, okay, childcare has got to be one of the top priorities in the American Rescue Plan. And so we fought for and won a total, if you count the money in December and then the money that was passed in the American Rescue Plan, which was over $50 billion in childcare relief. That money is now going out the door with guidance and things like that. And it's going to help stabilize providers. It's going to help make sure parents can afford to send their kids back. It's going to help with some of the debt that providers have taken on. It's going to provide paid leave to providers, et cetera. But that money is it's just to stabilize. It's not. One of the pushbacks we're getting now as we're beginning to say, let's learn from the past year is, well, we just gave you $50 billion. No, honey, no, like that's, that was just to dig us out of the hole that was left by decades of disinvestment. And so where we are right now is working with our champions to begin to really make the push for what's actually needed. And what is that? We need, just prepare yourself, $700 billion over the next 10 years in order to have high quality, affordable childcare for all. This number is based on calculations that we've done, both based on what North Star bills like the Childcare for Working Families Act cost, the increased infrastructure needs that facilities have, and other kinds of investments that we know are needed in light of the pandemic. Now, what President Biden has put out is $200 billion for preschool, so universal pre-K for 3 and 4-year-olds, and then another $225 billion for childcare. So 425 total. We're asking for 700. to contextualize that, the 425 is historic. I mean, that is like no president, those words have not come out of their lips. And so I don't want to poo-poo it. I don't want to say that this isn't a historic window to lean into and to fight for it. But when you ask for 425 billion, you get 300 billion if you're lucky. So like, it's our job as advocates to actually paint the picture of what is needed. What does it mean to make sure that no parent pays more than 7% of their income towards childcare on a sliding scale? What does it mean to pay providers on parity with public school teachers? What does it mean to actually build facilities and to deal with lead pipe remediation and make sure that we're dealing with supply issues in childcare deserts? And when you lay all that out, when you articulate the vision, 700 billion is actually a deal. Because one of the things that we've done is really say, if you did this, not just, a lot of orgs have calculated the cost of inaction. What happens because we haven't done this? Women are getting pushed out of the labor force and children are getting to kindergarten on unequal footing. We worked with Columbia University and we said, well, what would happen if you did invest? What would that mean? And we found that women's labor force participation would increase by 17%. And for women without a college degree, disproportionately women of color, it would go up by 31%. That would mean about $100,000 more in lifetime earnings, and even more when you add in retirement and Social Security savings, all of those kinds of things. That a cohort of women today would see $130 billion more over their lifetime in earnings. And that we would be closing poverty gaps among white women, Black women, et cetera, in retirement, because Black and Latino women would be able to put aside more for retirement. So this is not just an issue of what happens during the pandemic. The losses of wages compound over time because you're cutting your hours back, you're stepping out of the labor force, you're taking a job that you really don't want, but it has better hours or it's closer to your childcare center. All of those wage losses and missed opportunities compound until you hit senior poverty. And that's when you see it sort of just widen again with women and men. And so when we're talking to lawmakers now, we're really painting a picture of what does it look like if we invest now, if we seize this moment and all that we've learned over the last year and make those kinds of investments. And so the president's budget's coming out on May 27th. We expect it to include the $425 billion. We are going to praise that. And then we are going to also work with Congress to see if we can have our champions come in at a higher number, because the next stage after that will be the congressional budget resolution. For those of you, I don't know if it's helpful for me to speak a little bit about the reconciliation process and what it looks like to pass anything this year. But basically, you need a budget resolution that is giving instructions in the sum of a certain amount to the committees writing this law. And whatever that amount is, that's what we're going to have to work within. And so that is hello, childcare. And so that's the amount we're going to have to work with. Okay, sweetie, go to daddy. Bye. And then we are working across the movement to really try and mobilize around that number and in the key states. I'm going to sign off now and I'll come back.
Thanks, Melissa. So I know that there's a number of things that are kind of swirling in my head as I'm listening to each individual talk and trying to connect dots myself. But Donna, I'm going to actually invite you to kind of chime in here, because I know a good piece of the work that you do is like, you see this and I listen to you talk just in casual conversation, and I enjoy the way your mind kind of is connecting all these dots from, the national level to the state level to what's happening in a care facility. So just talk and let's hear what you think, what you're thinking.
Yeah, thank you, Iffy. And obviously, Valerie and Nancy, thanks so much for taking the time, because I'm sure you've already had a really long day. And every day is a long day. I've been to Jolly Toddlers. I know what it's like there. It is amazing. Valerie, I have to come out to your facility. And obviously, Lissa, with her children working full time, Mai and Melissa, thank you. And Iffy, and to the Bucks women. So here's the sort of question. Somebody asked, like, why when Nancy says they need more services, does it take 3 months to get them? And why is the issue of the women falling out of the labor force, why is that happening and associated with childcare? So I wanted to start with those two questions since they came up. And the first one is that, first of all, we have a affordable childcare shortage, right? So Melissa talked about the fact that the Biden administration is talking about $225 billion for childcare. That would be great. Across 50 states, it's not a hill of beans, you know, it's over 10 years, it's not a ton of money. So we will still have an affordable childcare crisis for all families, even if the feds step up to the table as the president has proposed. And what that means is that neither Nancy nor Valerie have enough liquidity to operate a high quality childcare center without charging parents who are over subsidy income exorbitant rates. So what does that mean? In Pennsylvania, let's say a family earning $30,000 a year with 2 or 3 children can get subsidized childcare. But a family earning $50,000 a year with 2 or 3 children is not likely to be able to get childcare. Maybe if they have 2 children, they're not likely to get a subsidized childcare. So they're going to be spending in Bucks County between $11,000 and $14,000 a year in childcare. And I'm not telling you anything you don't know. And so as the recession has taken hold from the pandemic and so many people are out of work, the possibility of people returning and having enough money to pay for those childcare costs is much lower than it was pre-pandemic. So Nancy and Valerie are likely to have less liquidity, and we have a shortage of people we have more people who want to go to work who can't afford it and can't get the subsidy payment. So there's a delay because there's a shortage of subsidy. And there's also a delay in the social and emotional services that Nancy and Valerie were talking about, which are either early intervention services or infant toddler behavioral health services. And that is because they are so underdeveloped in Pennsylvania and they are underinvested in Pennsylvania. And while there is some federal funding behind that, the state really needs to step to the table to expand that. So when they speak about a delay in services, mostly what they're talking about is the access to behavioral health services, early intervention services, and the systems both being bureaucratic, underfunded, unresponsive, and underdeveloped. And we have a lot of work to do, especially because what you hear Valerie talking about is kids coming in with much more emotional baggage than they've had in the past. That's not going to go away for many years. And so we've got to make sure to up those services. And that's not going to be in the Biden package. That's got to be something we take care of at the state. The second thing is that you should know in Bucks County that Brian Fitzpatrick has been very vocal in supporting childcare. He was the first Republican on the Childcare is Essential Act when Donald Trump was still president. And hopefully he will be the first champion to come out for the Biden package. That is, if you guys all talk to him and say, hey, Bri, step to the plate and not only say the Biden package is good, say it's a great start, it needs to be $700 billion, because we are not going to solve the kinds of problems that we heard about from all these great women on the cheap. The second thing is that the challenge for Nancy and Valerie and Lissa out in Western Pennsylvania is that childcare in America is a federal-state partnership. And if the federal government steps up and the state doesn't match that level, we will still have a significant shortage. Now, you should think about this. In European countries, it is not a federal-state partnership. The federal governments fund childcare. But we have a saying, I love the new saying that is floating around that other countries have safety nets, we have women. And if that's going to change and women are going to say, enough is enough, I want to be in the labor force, I need to be able to take a job regardless of income and not lose my childcare subsidy, I need to take a job regardless of hours, then we need to be understanding that half of our fight in America is at the feds and half of our fight is at the state level. And the Bucks County delegation in the Pennsylvania legislature, Senator Sanacero, Senator Tomlinson, very supportive. I would say they both need to prioritize this issue considerably more, although while they speak very positively and they're both great guys, fundamentally, they need to go to their leaders and demand more for the women in Bucks County. In addition, your state House delegation has extremely strong women who I think should be organized into a Democratic and Republican coalition for childcare and should unite to demand that the governor put a match on the table to the federal increase so that we can actually get far more women into the labor force. I'm going to close this by saying that pre-pandemic, the Pennsylvania Chamber of Commerce was very exercised about the need to invest in childcare. Now, I've been doing this work in Pennsylvania for 30 years. I've never heard peep from the Pennsylvania Chamber of Commerce on the need for childcare. But there was a labor force shortage before the pandemic. And employers were going to second and third shift, and they could not find enough workers, even though there was demand for their product, to support their second and third shift, because after-hour childcare, weekend childcare is far too expensive and too rare. And so they were pushing. They had 9 field hearings across the state. And in those field hearings, childcare was a top tier issue in every one of them. Well, we have a labor force shortage now. And that labor force shortage is mostly made up of women. And so we need to be able to speak to the local chambers, the 3 chambers in Bucks County, and be saying to them, how can you stand with us to get access to more affordable childcare so that women can return to the labor force? And then finally, one of the things I notice about the chamber involvement is that they sort of skip the word quality. Well, you're not going to get the kind of thoughtful discussion about having a fish tank and having circles where we deal with emotional needs from low quality childcare providers. That's not what they can afford to do. And we do not pay high quality childcare providers enough. Mai said people are leaving for Chipotle jobs. I was in a meeting where a woman who'd worked in childcare in Bucks County for 24 years, had a master's in education, finally had to accept a job at Target for $24 an hour because it was too much to turn down, because she would have been a mid-level manager at Target instead of a master's level childcare staffer in Bucks County, because we are not paying childcare providers enough to keep quality staff. And so we could go way in the weeds on this. I know Sarah Schaffler has extraordinary experience in early intervention, but fundamentally, this comes down to a failure of will of our lawmakers not making childcare and high quality childcare a priority, and women in the legislature, in my mind, especially those in Bucks County, because of you, and because there's so many women in the state house from Bucks County, can really make a difference in this. And so, obviously PCCY and BICWAC work together. We're happy to work with you on that, work with you to get a meeting with Brian as soon as the Biden bill comes out. But we really need to step to the plate and recognize that the she session is giving us leverage. People need women back in the labor force. Let's use that moment and demand what it takes for women to actually get back in the labor force for good, and for kids to be able to enter the labor force at a much higher level than their parents because they went to high quality early childhood education. That's sort of my takeaway from listening to the amazing conversation so far this evening.
Like I said, it's kind of brilliant the way you put it all together. So I have a question, and I think I'm a little bit interested from everybody's perspective, quite frankly. So, right, the number that Melissa told us all to brace ourselves for was 700 billion, and right, but we're definitely already talking about a smaller number than that, right? So we've already come down a bit, and I can appreciate you ask for 425, you get 300, and so I'm kind of curious, when we know that, when we know good is, 700 billion, and we're going to come in lower than that. And absolutely, right, I agree with that. Like, we're going to praise it, and right, it's a both and. Great job, and it should be more. How does that, how do you paint the picture of what that looks like for a Valerie and a Nancy? Maya, I'm even thinking about you in terms of, as you're looking at these, not insubstantial wage gaps, what that may mean in terms of not really being able to close the gap, or how little you can close the gap, or do you continue to widen a gap? Because sometimes when you don't have enough resources, they don't always proportionately land where they should. And so a little bit about how, when that number's smaller, what that looks like from a provider perspective, from this equity lens, and at the state and federal level, ultimately kind of where you think those sacrifices typically land or might land.
I can kick off and go sort of national down if it's helpful, because I can sort of explain a little bit where the number diverges from what we're saying. The Biden administration is proposing all the things I said for childcare, capping it at 7% of cost for for families, for paying providers on par with kindergarten teachers, et cetera, but only for children 0 to 5. So at 6 to 13, they're proposing that get picked up by the Child Independent Care Tax Credit, an increase in the Child Independent Care Tax Credit. We have long been a proponent of making that tax credit refundable, of making sure that low and moderate income families can reach it. The problem, though, with that being a primary tool is twofold. One, most families can't float their childcare costs until the end of the year and wait for a tax refund. And the second being that it's not really doing anything. It's helping with the affordability side for parents, assuming they can float that money. It's not helping with the supply building. It's not helping with the wages of the workforce. It's not helping with the services and the comprehensive system that you need. You would never throw a tax credit at K through 12 public education as the primary solution. You build a system. And when you conceive of childcare as a public good, which is what this pandemic has forced us to reckon with, it is a public good, then a tax credit is a nice complement. But what you actually need is the full suite of services you would offer for 6 to 13-year-olds as well. And so that's where a lot of the gap comes from. And so I'll stop there, but that's like one of the big differences between the number that we're saying, especially given how much trauma we know kids are coming back to school with, and how after school activities, how summer, how those breaks, that time is really important for addressing that trauma, those mental health needs. The need is more, not less. And so I am thrilled with 0 to 5 getting those investments in there, but it's not like children's brains change from 5 to 6 in such a way that we can just move to a tax credit.
Or that families can afford to be dependent on a tax credit and the method of how you access a tax credit for the purpose of paying for after school care.
Right. Or summer camp, or
right,
like,
which is basically year round, is after school care, out of school time care. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'd like to chime in. This is Nancy again. I want to tell you that I have seriously considered dropping out of STARS. And the sole reason is the amount of pressure and stress that it puts on my staff, who have been with me making less than even what you guys are talking about. It's too much. I've been doing this since 2002. And unless I see something, coming soon, I ask myself, why? Why do I do this? I'm probably going to do it anyway, except that Ocdel pressures myself and all of my staff. They abuse us as far as I'm concerned, and have been telling them that for years. I've sat on many committees and I get lip service, just what I think Melissa, I think, is the person that said that. I was so happy to hear her say that, because I used to think with all these meetings that I would go to and express my feelings, I used to think, did they just not hear me? Did they not believe me? That's the feeling I get when I sit at many of the, not recently, not during the pandemic, but I sit there, I talk about what needs to be done, how we can change things. I've had meetings at my child care center with many people there. They just, they walk away and go, okay, it's basically, this is how I feel. Basically like, okay, kiddo, you've been doing a good job here. It looks pretty good here. See you later.
So Nancy, let me say something, because what Nancy's saying is really important for BICWAC to understand. When providers ask for the state to pay for quality, the state says they're doing it now. Why should we pay them more? You know, I have long advocated personally that there be strikes, that childcare providers go on strike so that people understand that if they don't pay, they don't get quality. But I will tell you that, again, the BICWAC coalition can make an extraordinary impact on the issues that Nancy is raising, because the reason that the state administrators turn around and leave Nancy center and don't do anything about what she says, because they don't have any money. The executive branch doesn't have the money. The legislature has to appropriate the money. Now, it's not all money, but certainly if Nancy could pay more to her staff, then the stress would be released. But what the state reimbursement is to childcare providers, those that are to the top quality, nobody in their right mind would be doing this, except for women like Valerie and Nancy, these saints that we depend on to help women get in the workforce and do great things for children. And it's long overdue for us to say to lawmakers, time's up. This is a big time's up issue. We need to say, pay for this service and reward the women who have been doing this, because absent doing that, we are maintaining both a women's recession and a segregation in the economic ladder of women. So many women work in childcare, they can't get ahead. They can't build equity because they're doing the labor that's needed for the rest of the economy to work and not getting paid for it. We have a fundamental, anti-women economic policy, and the brunt of it's borne by childcare directors like Nancy and Valerie and the staff in these agencies. So with BICWAC, we can change that. We can at least get Bucks County to demand better, so the providers are not alone.
So I am seeing in the chat from one of our guests this idea of how can we support, supporters, and I think Louise is really talking about these providers, right? That are and so I think to your point, right? Here's a really specific area in terms of the work that the coalition could call for in terms of supporting Nancy and Valerie and really understanding, and I'd love, Valerie, for you to chime in as well on this, what this impact could be, right? Because without question, I hear the frustration, and I know that there is this kind of push-pull between people trying to pay for childcare and people and wanting access to really quality care and understanding that, I'm not going to lie, I was driving past a car wash that had a sign out front that said they were paying $15 an hour, and I thought that would be one hell of a summer job to just wash cars for $15 an hour. So I could appreciate, right? Like there's kind of this odd competition, and frankly, when I think about the wage conversations, and I'm a big proponent for, frankly, getting to generous wages, right? So you don't want to say like, oh, we shouldn't be paying generously over here because it's not happening in childcare, but you want to lift up childcare. So I think one thing that'd be really great for all of us is hearing what that makes possible for you as providers, for the people on your staff even more, and kind of echoing and being able to really be able to paint that picture in our own advocacy as we go out and say, this is what it means if Valerie's able to pay better wages to, herself, to her staff, and really, because she's providing the care, and the gap will be like that the loss of that will be huge. When Nancy decides I'm out, like the loss will be huge to families, and really understanding what that looks like. So yes, Valerie, please chime in. I'm sitting, I'm getting worked up.
Well, I would love to chime in because my wheelhouse is in accounting. That's what my undergrad is in. So as you're talking about tax credits being refundable, and I've done it all for my parents, parents who only paid once a year because they had to wait till their tax return came in so that they could afford to pay for my services, parents who are more affluent and they can pay the bill without questioning anything. It's okay. And then there are the parents who are struggling even with their copay. They're receiving state subsidy, but it's a challenge just to pay what their balance is, because they still need to put food on the table. So I do a sit down, we sit and talk, and it's a sliding scale. Tell me what you can afford. It's on your honesty, because when I build and invest in you, I don't have high turnover. So I don't have a child here today, gone tomorrow. I have a child here today with me for 10 years. So if I invest in you, we're going to work together, and whatever your circumstances is, my job is to get you off of subsidies so that you can take care of yourself, be able to eventually pay for my services outright, and take care of your family. Secured housing, secured social and emotional health, secured, just counseling overall. So it's like full service social working involved in there. But financially, every day, every single day, I'm calculating what's happening with my money. How is my business running? How much is this widget? And what I got to do to make it work. It's a dance, and it's exasperating. And if I didn't have a business degree, I can't imagine how other centers are functioning. Now, I have my master's in education, educational leadership. I have all that other stuff too. But the foundation that has kept me afloat, the reason why I chose to close another center that was larger, that could hold 100 children, and I serviced over 100 children there, I closed that center and went small because I didn't see a foreseeable end to the pandemic. I didn't see a foreseeable end of how I could maintain high quality, pay my team accordingly, because I do. They all have degrees. I respect their degrees, what they've done to get it. I understand that it's a challenge, and I want them to want to work for me. I want them to want to work for the children and for themselves. And that comes at a cost. And I ask the teacher, what is their number? So when they're hired for me, they tell me what they want to be paid. And, we negotiate. But some, have a grandiose idea of what they are worth. And then I'm like, well, we go from there. But every day I'm assessing how we can do better, how I can pay more. Just right now, looking around the environment everywhere, nobody can find employees. No one can find employees. So they're sitting there 15, 16, 50 an hour. So I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? I need to up what I'm paying my teachers right now. I need to up it. Like, in my mind, I must find a way to make more money so I can pay my teachers more, period. And that's what I'm doing.
It's like it's a math problem, right? It doesn't add up. You can't, 2 + 2 doesn't equal 5. You need more money in the system.
Right. And you need other streams to flow in. So, it's like, okay, well, the business needs to do other things, to function, but we shouldn't have to function that way. We should not have to function that way. The stress, the late nights, figuring out, how can I give my children well-rounded experience to those who may never see these opportunities in their life. I've seen the world. I want my children to experience it too. I don't have any biological children. When I say my children, I mean my students. I want them to see what is beyond their community and come back and lift the community members up too, so that there's more out here. We can all get this. We can all grow in the right direction together. We just have to communicate effectively, work together, and spread the love financially, but emotionally as well. Let's spread this together so we can all, we'll all benefit from it in the long run.
I would think too, as I'm listening to you talk, right, and even this idea of what kids, what they're coming in with, but then also what they witness, right, and understanding what they're seeing, and if there's, however they're understanding and comprehending it at different ages, they are exposed to some level of this struggle. And I think, and I'm gonna maybe pull you in a little bit, around, right? So you have these gaps already that children are missing or witnessing in wages, and how that continues. And so a little bit around, when the numbers aren't adding up, and there's already these existing gaps and wealth and wages, kind of how that then, I guess, multiplies, and what that further impact is.
Are you talking about parents or on the provider side?
I think maybe I would assume maybe both.
Both. Well, I think that on the parent side, and I think a lot of us are parents here, there's this choice between affordability and quality, and I think a lot of times parents are forced to choose affordability, so they're choosing star 1s and star 2s, and that's why I was talking earlier about, why is it that low income or children of color are more likely to be in low quality programs, is because, supply is just not there to support them to in quality. And so on the provider side, it's high turnover. If you can't afford to keep credentialed staff are more likely to leave. And high turnover has been associated with a lot of negative outcomes for kids. Continuity of care is something that's a mantra in early child education, how important it is that children have attachment to staff who are there on a regular basis, who can help support their brain development. And so it's not something pleasant to think about, because these are kind of the consequences of a system that's been underinvested in. But those are some of the choices that parents and providers are faced with. I did want to go back to something that you were talking about a little earlier about, when you have to shrink from 700 billion to 425
Yes.
to 300 billion, and what that looks like on the ground. And I have to say, like, at the national level, as Melissa was talking about, like, you're thinking about investments in childcare on this really broad level, but on the state level and the local level, you're trying to figure out what to do with that money. And that's one of the things that PCCY, as part of the Start Strong PA campaign, has been working on for the past few months. Is we got $1.18 billion from the American Rescue Plan for childcare in the state of Pennsylvania. And we've been putting together a series of field hearings, or field forums, we're calling them, where we listen to providers and parents and business leaders about how they think that money should be spent. And we've heard just incredibly powerful stories from providers and parents about what the system really needs right now. And it's a little bit of a puzzle about, like, well, how much is this going to cost? How much is that going to cost? And where should the priorities be? And these are decisions that are being made at the local level. And for an organization like Big Whack, if you want to have a voice, you can write letters, you can reach out to your legislators, you can talk to people about where you think the money should go. And for what we're talking about today, a lot of it has to do with salaries for staff. And maybe if we think a little bit more creatively, not just salaries, but like benefits and sign-on bonuses, retention bonuses. We're talking about maybe covering the cost of co-pays for parents where it's a real struggle, or maybe waiving it for a year or two as we make our way out of this pandemic. So there's a lot of ways in which the money can be spent that can really alleviate what the system is really struggling with right now. And then when we start thinking in a more visionary way about what 700 billion, 425 billion can bring, we can think more about not just paying teachers on par with kindergarten teachers, but also like what a healthcare package would look like for the childcare industry. If we had a statewide healthcare package that all childcare providers could pay into, and then they would all have healthcare, like, wouldn't that be great? So it's a little bit of a puzzle on the state level, but I think that it's a really great time for us to think big about these things.
Yeah, and I'm going to echo one of the comments in the chat where, a better way just to look after our most important segment of our population, our children. It seems like a no-brainer, as complex as it is, but it seems like a no-brainer. I want to be mindful of time, and just, I know people have been putting some things into the chat and some things into the Q&A. So if people have questions who are listening, please feel free to keep adding things into the Q&A and into the chat. I want to just call attention, Donna, to one of the things in the chat around childcare subsidies. And I'm wondering if you could just talk briefly about that so everybody kind of hears the answer in case they weren't paying attention to what was in the Q&A around childcare subsidies for all ages. Should it be a tiered system?
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Two things. Somebody said, should we have a tiered childcare payment system where, regardless of income, everybody just pays an amount towards their childcare? And of course, that would be the ideal thing. And that's how a normal world works. We live in America. And so we have to do this on the cheap and think that people have a printing press for money in their house. And so right now in the state, we do have a tiered system, meaning you pay a % of your income towards childcare up to families who are earning 200% of the federal poverty level. So again, if you have if you're a family with 2 kids, you're earning about $28,000 a year, and you could qualify for childcare subsidy. And if you're working and we haven't run out of subsidy, you get it. But we don't have enough subsidy to cover even a third of the people who are eligible for that subsidy. So, it going up to a higher level, which it makes complete sense, simply means if pie doesn't grow, it's an academic concept, right? We have to grow the pie so that more families, especially those on limited means, can pay childcare. But anybody under 200% is paying a sliding scale. So the poorest people are paying less towards childcare than the wealthiest of those families under 28,000 or so. So that's one thing. And of course, it would be great to grow the pie. Even the Biden proposal does not enable states to get far above their current levels of income caps. Pennsylvania has a pretty high income cap, so some states are even lower than us. So, we have a long way to go for us to have a civilized economic system in America. But I will say the other question in the chat was also about what can we do right now? And I want to let you know that Mai just talked about these 12 field hearings that we've had across the state to hear from providers and parents. We're just finalizing what did people say was the most important thing to do with the American Rescue Act funds. And there's a lot of money there. There's 1.16 billion that can be spent over 2.5 years. And then there's also the state budget, and we're putting that letter together. So what should the state do, and what do we recommend happen with these federal funds? And we would love to share that with everybody on the call tonight and with BICWAC, so you can formally support that. Let the providers in your community know you're supporting it, and begin to meet with your elected officials at the state level to move on that, while we also help you move. And you don't need any help talking to Brian Fitzpatrick about this. But by the way, obviously we got to get to Brian pretty quick.
Absolutely. We would love to help echo and amplify any of those findings. So as soon as we pull together.
And maybe even thinking for BICWAC, thinking about how you all sort of say, look, we're going to go to especially the women in Bucks, it doesn't have to be, but they are all primed on this, to say, what can we as Bucks County Women's Advocacy Coalition and the women in the State House want to stand together and make this demand? I mean, I think you have a unique capacity to do that.
I want to just echo, I'm so sorry.
No, go ahead, Melissa, go ahead.
I was going to say, I want to echo Donna's point, particularly in Representative Fitzpatrick. There was a bipartisan vote on relief dollars for childcare over the summer, and Representative Fitzpatrick was one of those Republicans on there. So he is a prime target at the federal level for the rebuilding money. And so the degree to which folks can also lean in on that federal ask as constituents will be really important. The other person I would say who is a champion is Senator Casey. And so some of this is also about how do we use our champions? If he is out there, he's on the finance committee, which is where, number one, they have jurisdiction over some of the childcare money. And they're about to introduce a bill that would increase it. And they also have jurisdiction over the taxes that we need to pay for it. And that's a whole separate conversation. I'm also a tax policy person. If anybody wants to tax the patriarchy, you come find me. We will tax it. But we have to pay for this in the way our budget system works. It can't add to the deficit over 10 years. And so we are actually the Senate Finance Committee, where Senator Casey is, an incredibly important committee in these conversations coming up on these packages. And so really being able to meet with him, connect with him, really let him know this is a priority, that you appreciate his being a champion, but also we want to make sure that he's getting himself in the rooms, that he, when there's decisions and trade-offs being made on the Democratic caucus, that childcare is front and center, that they're finding the money to pay for these things. And that he's also been a huge champion and the lead, I would say, in the Senate on the child and dependent care tax credit.
Yeah,
that's obviously, we support that. Like, I've spoken on panels with Senator Casey about the importance of that tax credit, but it cannot be seen as a substitute for direct spending for that age group. And so engaging him on that conversation.
I want to ask Lisa to chime in, one, because I think it looks like you have some things to say, and two, I know you mentioned in the chat around a response to this idea of legislation out there. So if you could speak to both of those things, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, that'd be perfect. They're actually kind of connected. The next thing I wanted to say is about one other thing. I know there's some really urgent things related to the federal proposal and the stuff that PCCY is working on with their letters. and getting things moving now. But the other thing that's coming up that we shouldn't forget about is over the next 6 months, we're going to start hearing from candidates for State House and candidates for Congress. We're certainly already hearing from candidates for Senate at the federal level, and really holding some of these folks kind of feet to the fire very early on when you hear that they're a candidate, knowing that they're going to be out in the community, assuming we're doing more of that again with COVID, at community events this summer, and having conversations and making sure they know that it's a priority to the women in Bucks County and to the women across Pennsylvania, I think is really, really important. And then the other piece that I would say is I put in the chat too, if folks didn't see, around legislation. I mentioned a bit about the need to lower barriers so that more women are in the state legislature, and childcare being one of them. So we've seen over a dozen states actually pass legislation affirmatively declaring that candidates can spend PAC money on childcare. I believe Pennsylvania introduced a bill in a prior session and it did not move anywhere. And they've sort of said, well, we think we could do it, we're just going to do it anyway. But like putting it out there, saying for folks who may be kind of on the fence about whether or not to run for office, especially if they're single moms for whom childcare is a huge concern right now in whatever they are doing, and would be as a candidate. I think that is some really critical legislation that will, over the hopefully less than next few years, change the makeup of the legislature and change frankly, the gender bias that exists. I had wanted to chime in when I heard the end of what Valerie said. One, just because I loved it. It was compelling. She talked about working together. I could tell the MBA because she mentioned the finance piece, but like so much of what she said, I feel like I've been in those meetings with legislators and providers here. Exactly what Nancy said. Oh, things are going well here. Everything's good. Yeah, they said their wages are a little low, but these women all really love what they do and they're not here for the money. And to really say, no, this is an economic issue, and those women who have bachelor's degrees and master's degrees deserve to be paid the same way that K-12 teachers are being paid, the same way that higher ed professors are being, well, full-time, that's a whole other issue. Anyhow, they deserve to be paid, right? And they deserve the benefit. It's not just the pay, it's not just the salary, that's a piece of it, but it's the retirement benefits, it's the paid time off. We had 2 teachers at my kids' childcare center just go on maternity leave, which is wonderful for them. But our center is putting out bonuses for parents, tuition discounts, if we can recruit them a teacher, because otherwise they may have to close classrooms down and they may not be serving my kids anymore. So anyhow, I got a little off, but thank you.
No, I think that's a very good picture. There's a question in the Q&A, and I know Donna had talked a little bit about the chambers, but I know she had to jump off for another event, unfortunately. So I don't know if anybody here is able to speak to this question that's in the Q&A. What happened to the movement of corporations and businesses to set up on-site centers, and where the chamber might fall in that? Are any of you able to kind of speak to that a little bit?
I can provide a national perspective on that. Obviously don't know as much about how it's playing out in Bucks County. I mean, one of the things I will say is that it's great to engage the business community. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation actually put out a really great study in December showing how worried they were that mothers were not coming back to work, in large part because of childcare and how that was affecting their bottom line, et cetera. On the on-site childcare question, part of what we have found is that when businesses do that, it's mostly for their white collar workers. And so if you're working at, Target corporate headquarters, or but not Target, if you're a frontline manager in the store, an associate. If you are working at McDonald's as, executive VP, maybe they have on-site childcare. I'm just making up the companies. But at the McDonald's on the corner around the street where people are working in shifts and fighting for $15 an hour in a union, like they're not having on-site childcare there. And so there's a lot of lip service around like on-site childcare, but it's predominantly as a tool to keep professional women, as opposed to really being as opposed to really being available for the people who need it the most.
I imagine that widens the equity gap when you're seeing it one level and not at the other.
Yeah,
And it's the same reason we see corporations fighting for tax credits. It's like, oh, let's make this more affordable for our white collar workers. But like, and that's fine. Like, I don't begrudge anybody a tax credit to help pay for their care expenses. But if you want low income women, working class women who have been struggling the most to be able to access high quality, affordable childcare, you don't solve that with a tax credit when they don't have tax liability.
Yeah, I will also add that when you think about who is the typical child care center proprietor, business owner, it's women, and in many communities, it's women of color. And when you think about the efficiency of where to put your money, like, it just doesn't make sense to put money into building a completely new childcare center from scratch when there are so many good and I don't want to say good, but great childcare programs already in the community, and you could be investing in those programs as opposed to building ones from scratch. And I had a friend who worked for Viacom in New York City, and they had on-site childcare. And it was run not by a community-based organization or a nonprofit, but by a Brightside Academy, which is a corporate childcare center. And there's nothing wrong with corporate. It's just that we would love to see money invested into community, into women-owned businesses, as opposed to like Melissa is saying, and kind of supporting white collar families and supporting corporate businesses that are running on a different model than what Valerie and Nancy are running on. So,
and can I just make one more just addendum to what you're saying, because it's actually a really important point, which is that as soon as childcare money arrives and materializes in bulk, actors appear that want to capitalize on it. And so, I mean, even the Biden administration put forward in its proposal $25 billion for childcare facilities and infrastructure to build, including in childcare deserts. Guess who's going to be for private equity, corporate, entities are going to be lining up, and they have the tax lawyers, they have the staff to quickly apply to put these applications together. We saw what happened when so many childcare providers got left out of the PPP loans. Because, and then meanwhile, like NBA teams are applying for PPP loans. And so there's going to have to also, it's not just about the money, although the money's a prerequisite to anything else happening. What guardrails are we putting around this so that Black and brown women owned businesses, that, women of color owned childcare centers are able to access the investments that come in? And it doesn't just become, a way for Bain Capital to expand Bright Horizons to every, every corporate headquarters.
Yeah. And that's what I was saying. It's just that there's nothing wrong inherently with the idea of on-site childcare for employers, that if they want to do that for the employees, but why not partner with a community-based childcare program? They could run a satellite site off of your building, and they already have staff that are credentialed, and there's a way to do this in such a, we can be investing in our community as opposed to in corporations. That's what I'm saying. Well,
and it certainly seems like this, right, we're seeing it tonight. The skill set is there, so let's invest in the existing skill set. Although I've got a little humorous picture in my head of Valerie and Nancy with like hard hats out there building some new centers in the desert. So go get that money and see what you can build. I'm looking at the time. I want to make sure. I know that there's something in here around reaching out to Toomey from one of our guests. So we'll make sure. I think what I'm hearing is there are a lot of elected officials to tag, and certainly there's the champions we need to kind of continue to push and support, and then there are the ones that are maybe not quite there yet that we can continue to advocate with as well. I want to know, and I want to just say, everybody has been so great to give time, because I asked a group of really busy women to come in here and talk about an issue that really impacts women at a time, a day that's really hard for parents. So I know everybody juggled a lot to be here. I want to give people a chance to kind of give a few last closing thoughts that you may want to share. Melissa, I know you're going to have to hop off shortly, and I know, Melissa, you did too. So maybe we can start with the two of you, And just last thoughts that you would like to leave the group with as at the end of this conversation.
Well, thank you for having me first and foremost. It's really been an honor to serve on this particular panel with these particular women and to speak to this organization, which is building power. I'm excited to, hopefully this is the beginning of the conversation and we can keep working together. I would say that, just to close out, 50 years ago, there was a universal childcare bill on President Nixon's desk and he vetoed it. And if you look at the alternative history, 2021 is the 50th anniversary of that veto. And the US has done this before during World War II, when many men were fighting overseas and they needed women in the factories, et cetera. We built an entire childcare system, publicly funded childcare system, high quality, that was designed, to allow women to work. And then we shut it down. We can do big things. And so I think it's important to seize this moment that we are in, because as noted by the fact that it was 50 years ago that this last had sort of this chance of this big change, this is that window 50 years later. And if we don't mobilize on this now, I am telling you, as the vaccine rollout continues, as we return to whatever normal was, there's going to be this effort to gaslight us all. And how, we need to get back to normal. Normal was not okay. It wasn't okay before. And I think that the pandemic not just laid that bare, but exacerbated it. And so while we have this very unique window and opening, the mobilizations, the asks, the getting in with members of Congress, the not letting up, the pushing for more, this is the time to do that. There's a Jewish saying, if not now, when? Now, it's now. And so we at the National Women's Law Center are here for you. We want to partner with you, and we appreciate all you're doing to galvanize your lawmakers and the public will in general to get this done.
Thanks, Melissa. Lissa.
I think I'd just close a little bit with, oh geez, so much to say, but really that we have to stick with it. It's not just now. It's not like now the next 6 months and then maybe we get some federal money, maybe we don't, maybe the next state budget we get money or maybe we don't. It's really staying on elected officials, staying on them both in their official capacity, in their offices, having those official scheduled meetings that you go through staff to make, but seeing them out in the community, seeing them on the campaign trail, and constantly asking for follow-up, not just the, this is what I want, this is what I want, this is what I want, but calling them back 2 weeks later after you got sort of the templated response letter, or the little thank you note for inviting them to, whatever meeting you had. It's truly that follow-up that's going to get us to, even if we get that big federal money, that's going to get us to big systemic changes that aren't going to come quickly, but that can happen.
Thanks, Lissa. Nancy, if you're still with us, and Valerie, kind of last thoughts from both of you. It's been amazing. And again, thank you for joining us at the end of a long day.
Hi, it's Nancy. Yes, thank you for having me. I feel encouraged by this type of group. I don't think this is anything like a lip service. I really think this is a go-getter kind of group. And some of the things that some of the women, I think the representative was talking about, and Melissa, I wanted to say that unfortunately, they took away, which I think you and I talked about, they had an awards that they gave to staff that had the degrees this year. And instead of giving it to them, they took it away. And the other thing that we had going for us at the Child Care Center was education, which I'm big on, that the staff could get an education and pay 5%. They took that pretty much away too. So those are two big things that already had been, and this isn't just because of the pandemic, it's just because I think that those things, if we just get those back into, and then everything else that everybody's been talking about, I would be glad to be on a committee that does that, because I've been on committees where nothing happened. So I want to thank you. I really do. I'm happy to have been asked to be on this.
Thanks so much, Nancy. Valerie, how about you?
again, I'm going to say thank you. I appreciate the fact to be able to share my story, my team's story, and my children's story, as well as their parents. To just say services in the classroom are definitely needed. For those of us, there are many, many centers that stayed open thinking it was going, that, excuse me, many centers that stayed open throughout the entire pandemic, thinking that it was only going to be for 2 weeks, and it's been a year. So don't forget us. It came at an expensive cost. Think of us retroactively, financially, and also moving forward, think of our children and the services that they need. And on a side note, I must say that Congressman Fitzpatrick is a friend to Children of God. He is always at our center. Any function we have, he's there. He encourages our children. He reads to them. He talks to our parents. He is definitely a friend to our community and to our families. And from what I've seen personally, as a constituent, I respect the work that he's doing, and he is in love with childcare. So I can't thank him enough for all the help he's done for our center and for our families.
Thanks, Valerie. My final thoughts.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you again for having me and having PCCY. On behalf of Donna, thank you. I think I will close with that when we are engaging with lawmakers and doing our advocacy, that we stop and ask ourselves why we're not asking for more. Because I find that in the advocacy I've been involved with, a lot of times we're holding ourselves back. You know, we were, you know, Nancy says that she would love the educational retention awards to be brought back. And I would say that would be great, but why not bring them back, but better? You know, let's bring them back, but also double it and make it permanent and part of running a 4-star childcare program. So with that said, you know, thank you. And PCCY is happy to partner with Big WAC. Again, we'll send you guys some resources after this, so that if you want to reach out to Octal and talk about how you think the childcare money should be spent for the American Rescue Plan, there is a survey that's going to close on Friday, so you could fill that out, or reach out via email to me, and my door is always open as well.
I appreciate it. And thank you for that piece of asking for more, because I have to say, one of the things that really inspired me, even in just starting to talk about what this conversation could look like, was the idea of not saying thank you for what you're giving us, but really thinking about what could be great and what could really be transformational, and let's ask for that. So I appreciate that. I want to say again, thank you to everybody who spoke tonight. As people can see who are watching, we've had a couple of our panelists have to jump off, because this is what happens when you ask really incredible women to come together for a really important conversation, is that they're busy and they're doing a lot of work. And it has been just like a phenomenal honor on my part. So thank you to all of you for what you've done. I'm going to say thank you again to Comcast and Janet Steiner for their generous support of the event. I'm going to also say thank you to the YWCA of Bucks County and Kristen Chapin for technical support. She's behind the scenes. She's been great in kind of getting all of us connected tonight and helping to support the Women's Advocacy Coalition and making this event possible. So I want to just thank them, you know, in between eliminating racism and empowering women, they've also managed to keep us on Zoom and well connected tonight. So thank you to the YWCA of Bucks County. I want to thank the board of directors for the Bucks County Women's Advocacy Coalition, to Linda, who provides us really great administrative support, and to the issue specialists who volunteer their time following issues very closely and tracking legislation. That is what fuels this organization. So as much as I get to sit here and be on camera and look a little smarter because I'm surrounded by smart women, there's an incredible force of people who are just contributing to making this greatness happen. So thank you to all of them. To everybody watching, please don't forget to visit our website, bcwac.org. If you're not a partner, I certainly hope that you consider joining. I'm thrilled that we're recording this, because I was trying to scribble notes and then I kept telling myself, you can play it back later. You can play it back later. There's so many gems in this conversation. So for everybody watching, If you need to get it again later, we will get it up onto our website probably in the next couple of days, and we will share out a link next week in our next newsletter. So follow our work. Thank you to everybody for their time, both the panelists and our guests. Stay safe, healthy, and engaged in this transformational change. So thank you so much and have a great night.